This live presentation was produced in Ashland, Oregon by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. RVML relies on the support of our volunteers, members, and donors to organize and present these programs. For more information about this presentation, or to borrow, download, or purchase other recordings from our catalog, please visit our website at rvml.org.
Now we have both the the president and the front runner for the Democratic Party are both members of the Order of Skull and Bones, which is a very small little fraternity. And one of the things we're going to talk about today is why does this guy lie? Because he obviously does all the time, and it's one thing that these people do, I mean, he lies to the Christians, he lies to the right wing, he lies to whomever he pleases, to get his own way. It's basically a sociological thing called elite deviancy. It's a great book. It's used in sociological courses in college level. It's in its 6th edition. And it basically says, gee, we have all these scandals that have been going on, and it seems to be that there's a lot of the same people that are participating in this. And it is a thing they call elite devianism, where the elites believe that the law doesn't apply to them, and they have a purpose, and for this purpose they can do whatever they want. And some of this is rooted in some of the religious beliefs of these people. And but here we'll hopefully this thing works here. Okay. Basically, we're going to talk about God, man, and magic in Yale, and about the Order of Skull and Bones, a little bit about some of the mass psychology propaganda, the Hegelian dialectic, and current events. And we're going to just kind of actually touch some of that stuff. We're going to get more into some of the current events and some of the dialectics that these folks have been using to separate our population from our government, to separate our families from ourselves, and to separate any bonding units that are in the society and in the culture so that they can control it. Because it's much easier to control somebody if they think that it's just them against the world, or they're all by themselves. Come on here. Okay. This is my dad. And one of the big reasons why I'm here today is because of my dad, not just because he's my dad, but because of some things that he told me. And my father was in the intelligence services. He got involved in the intelligence services when he was 18 years old. He was a student in Linfield College in McMinnville, Oregon, and as his sophomore year in college, he spent at the University of Shanghai. He went to the University of Shanghai in 1936. Shanghai in the 30s was a very, very open city. He left Shanghai in 1937, the week before the Japanese bombed it, went on the Trans-Siberian Railway, went up to Vladivostok, however you say that, and went all the way to Vienna, and went to Switzerland, took his first plane trip into Switzerland to meet what he called his people there, and then ended up at Oxford in 1937 at a rather famous conference where the Dulles brothers were at. It was about religion and whatnot. This particular picture of him there, he is, when he went overt for the CIA, we'll backtrack a little bit. He was, after he graduated from Linfield in 1939 and went straight to Washington, D.C., he ended up working in the basement of the Library of Congress under Archibald MacLeish, who was OSS and Order of Skull and Bones. He was in charge of the Philippine desk, and they were basically the start of the CIA World Fact Book. They started on 3x5 cards because if people, they wanted to know something, they'd, have to create a body of knowledge, basically, that was factual. And they were the research and the analysis part of intelligence operation of the President of the United States. Basically, it's run out of the executive branch of the United States. That's what the OSS was, Office of Strategic Services. Well, they wanted somebody on MacArthur's staff because MacArthur represents part of the group that we're talking about today, and they couldn't get, I mean, there's certain factions involved, and MacArthur and his security chief, Colonel Willoughby, who was actually a German, had a different real last name, they didn't want anybody from OSS on their staff because that basically puts a president in on your staff meetings. Well, they ended up sheep-dipping my dad in 1943 and put him into the military. And made him a lieutenant and put him into G2, and then put him on G2 on to MacArthur's staff. But he always reported directly, his first reporting back was to Archibald MacLeish at the Library of Congress. And he ended up leaving, after they took the Philippines, and I mean, he was involved in quite a bit of the Philippines because the main guy who was running the Philippines, because we owned the Philippines at that time. Actually, well, the Japanese had taken it from us, but we could still considered we owned it, and we'd owned it for a long time before the Spanish-American War. We'll get into that a little bit later on. But then he was in the CIA, and he rose up to be branch chief head of all of East Asia for research and analysis. And then in 1951, he left the service to become an independent businessman. He got met on the street corner in New York City, got given a packet of money and some instructions to set up the Pacific Book Company of Jakarta, New York. The cover story that was basically told my mother was that, well, the communists are real good at running a printing press, and we haven't been very good at it, so we've got to get out there and run the printing press and tell the people how great democracy is. As he was just leaving the States, they said, here, and they handed him a big stack of catalogs, and he says, oh, by the way, you're representing these companies too. And basically we went to Indonesia. It had just become a republic after some turmoil after World War II, where they were taken over by the Japanese and other things too, and he ended up selling skeletons to the Indonesians. And I put that on there because my dad, we always knew that he worked for the CIA. I mean, I've got some older brothers and older sister, and we used to talk about it kind of, but you know, it wasn't something that he would talk about at home. He wouldn't talk about what he did at work and stuff like that. And so one day he asked me, he says, what do you think of the Vietnam War? And you know, I was a teenager, and you know, give my dad a flip teenage answer, you know, and I'd been raised on John Wayne and World War II, all my uncles and everybody was in World War II. And I said, well, you have a sack of hand grenades, you've got some rice patties, and you go, you know, throw the hand grenades and win it for the good guys wearing the white hats, you know, basically flip answer to your dad. And he said, well, we had to have a talk. And he waited quite a while. I'm not quite sure exactly the period of time between that conversation and the next, but he says, well, it was time to have that talk. And there was a professor in town, a Professor D.F. Fleming, who was a professor from Vanderbilt, and we'd spent about a year and a half in Nashville at Scarrett College, and my dad had become friends with this gentleman. And he wrote the book, Origins and History and Origins of the Cold War. And he said, well, it's time to have that talk. And he took me in my little brother's room and he sat me down. And he says, the Vietnam War is about drugs. There's these secret societies behind it. And then he says, and communism's all a sham. These same secret societies are behind it all. It's a big game. And I'm lost. I'm just completely lost, you know. I mean, you know, you're talking to your dad, you know, you're smarter than he is anyway, you know, and you know, I'm putting it together and I'm sitting there and I'm, okay, drugs, secret societies, mafia, okay, mafia. And then the communism, mafia, it didn't make any sense to me. I didn't understand. I mean, teachers been stuffing me under the desk because the Ruskies were going to bomb us, you know, and all this stuff. And you know, I'm thinking, Dad, you're nuts, you know, what's going on here? And then I'm thinking, oh, he's having a drug talk with me, you know, because I'm starting to grow my hair long. This is in the late 60s, you know, and I'm smoking a little bit of pot, you know, and so I'm thinking my dad he never had the sex talk with me, so I'm figuring this is my dad's way of having the drug talk with me, and you know, they tell me a couple other things about how when Eisenhower had come aboard, he had asked for this big worldwide assessment report, and my father and his crew and people had been responsible for a large part for the East Asia, especially the Southeast Asia. And he mentioned that what they told Eisenhower to do was to work with Ho Chi Minh, because we'd worked with him during World War II, and to not get involved in a land war in Asia. And my dad said that three times. That they had said that in the report, very strong, not get involved in a land war in Asia. And then they said something that they felt, and I guess he was talking about this other gentleman, they talked about, they felt that they were playing out a lose scenario in this assessment report. In this assessment report, there was, you know, if we do this, if we back this faction, if we back the Roman Catholics, if we do this, you know, such and such will happen. And he felt that they were playing out a lose scenario. And then the last thing they said to me was about how the news really wasn't the news. It was mostly sway pieces. And one of the things my dad had last done when we lived in Virginia had been help make the briefing paper that the president gets each day in the intelligence community, starts off the day there. And so he told me this, and you know, like I say, I'm just, you know, kind of gone on automatic pilot and saying yes. And then it was also quite obvious that I had nothing to base what they were telling me about. I had no comprehension of what they were saying. I just didn't know what they were saying and whatnot. And so I didn't really think about it much, but I had some other conversations with my dad and some arguments, because I continued to grow my hair longer and I continued to smoke pot. One thing that came out, especially in some arguments, was that he was very, very much concerned about that I was being led down this happy trail to be a junkie. That I was going to be, you know, and it went beyond just the basic reefer madness type thing, because he talked about how there was this thing to get all the kids hooked on heroin, and you know, but you know, I was a teenager, it didn't make any sense to me, and you know, I knew better than he did anyway, you know, and knock on wood, I never got hooked on heroin, didn't really care for the stuff, but beyond all that, So my dad told me this stuff, and later on I started to read about the Kennedy assassination. Guys, I was alive when it happened. I was in 8th grade Spanish class, and they called me for 8th grade out of Spanish, and I went and sold newspapers on the street. And so, you know, it was a traumatic thing, so I was reading about it, I believe, in some girly magazine, because there was lots of articles about the Kennedy assassination in girly magazines. And there was one magazine that was talking about all the different theories, and one of the theories that it talked about was about secret societies being involved, and so that started me thinking about what my dad was saying. So I started researching CIA drugs and other things too, and just started to look into the different literature that was out there. And let's see here. Go forward. Okay. Skull and bones. You know, it's an interesting symbol, you know. I mean, it's a symbol of death. It is. It's on poison bottles and whatnot. It was used for the first time by medical professionals, at least as far as historians can tell. They say from in the Middle Ages it was used, they would put it on doors for people that were really sick or had something strange that they didn't know about. And then later on, they started to use it without the lower mandible. The heretics started to use it when they would band together to talk about their meetings and different things. And when they were fighting basically the Catholic Church, you know, if they didn't like you, they would burn you. Well, I'm going to talk about a guy here. This is Colonel Lansdale. Now, Colonel Lansdale, I kind of use Colonel Lansdale as a bellwether to see how much people know about some of the subjects that I'm going to talk about. Because if you've looked into this literature, sometimes you'll run across Colonel Lansdale. Colonel Lansdale's an interesting fella. He was the prototype for the ugly American and the other American, two kind of different takes on the gentleman, on some things that he did. He came out of the advertising arena, out of California, and he was also in charge of Operation Mongoose, an operation that for many years was denied to exist. Operation Mongoose was the thing where they put the mob and the CIA together to kill Castro, that some people say turned on Kennedy. And there are some people, Colonel Prouty, a person who was very much in the place to know, says that Lansdale was at the Kennedy assassination at Dealey Plaza. And I think that is true too. I've talked to members of Lansdale's family, and he was a script writer. He was a script writer, and anytime you have any of these operations, you have to have a script. Okay, and these things are run by intelligence operations, and intelligence operations are run by the book, you know, and if it's your job to go from point A to point B, that's what you do. You go from point A to B, and you have no idea, and it's not your job to even ask, you know, and you're trained not to ask. You're trained just to go from point A to B. But see, one thing that why I'm here is because, you know, my father got himself to a position where he couldn't be hoodwinked. He had to know he knew the reasons why some of these things were happening. They couldn't just say, oh, well, if we don't do it, the communists are going to do it or stuff and whatnot. So one reason why we try to get this information out there is because it takes a hoodwink out of people that are operating with these people. Okay, and this is just, Lansdale used to come over to the family home there in 8th of June 1950. You know, when I was a little kid, you know, your parents, they had a guest book, you know, and people come over and they'd sign the guest book and stuff and whatnot. Well, you know, he's in there a couple times, but he was on their 10th wedding anniversary. And because my dad and Lansdale were real close because of the Philippines, and because Lansdale came from G2 and went to the CIA. Well, there are very few people that were in both services, and my dad was actually in both of them at the same time, and so he had access to two sets of books, okay? Because, see, military intelligence don't tell these guys over here everything they know, and these guys over here don't tell these people everything that they know. Okay, now here, this is a picture of Colonel Lansdale in 1956 in Tra Ninh, Vietnam. And in 1956, I was in first grade, and I got, my parents, we started off Washington, D.C., they separated in Minneapolis, and we went on to Oregon City and stayed with my grandparents, and they went off. We were told as kids that he was going to write a book on the church in Southeast Asia. Book was never written and whatnot, but they met Colonel Lansdale. You know, and it's funny, I go back and look at my dad's records in 1950, when he gets to the Philippines, first person he meets is Colonel Lansdale, you know, and stuff. And Lansdale at this time is still working for the CIA, okay? Colonel Lansdale, 1954, he was the first American to go into Vietnam. Okay, and he, one of the things he did, and you can read about it in books, he led one of the very few shooting wars between Western intelligence agencies. And what was he after? Well, he was after a place called the Golden Triangle, okay? It's up there, grow a lot of opium, okay? The French had been running it with some Corsican gangsters and whatnot. Well, he took it over, and it was a little bit before this when they had taken it over. And so, when I finally figured this stuff out, and one of the reasons I really helped me figure it out was I ran across a book by, and you know, support your library. I ran across a book by Professor Anthony Sutton, America's Secret Establishment, an Introduction to the Order of Skull and Bones, and I says, I said, because Anthony, you know, God rest his soul. He was basically a technology researcher, and he stumbled across this. And like so many people I met after this, I mean, he thought he stumbled across something, and it cost him his career, cost him his family, cost him up and down, okay? But the guy was right on. And so I stumbled across his book in 1988. Well, my dad died in 1990. The last couple of his years of his life, he had pancreatic cancer and he had Parkinson's and whatnot, so I never really got to talk to him much about it, okay? But I did talk to my mother one time, and I was asking her about this trip because I was really interested about this trip because I was studying the subject of CIA drugs, and they had on this trip, they'd been in Vietnam, and I knew they went to Thailand. Oh, goodness gracious me, it's a little city there. It's now the second largest city in Thailand. Chiang Mai, yes, Chiang Mai, Thailand. And I was wondering in 1956, how big was it? Because I know now it's a pretty big city. All the banks have, branches there and stuff like that. And there's a big highway up to the poppy fields. And E.J. Lilly has a place there. And so, I just, wondered how big Chiang Mai was in it, and so I was talking to her, and she said, well, Chiang Mai wasn't very big. The biggest thing in there was the church and whatnot. And then she just made a little aside, and she said, and that's when I stopped believing everything I read in the newspaper. And I says, well, Mother, what? And she says, well, because in the newspapers there in Chiang Mai, there was this big talk about this big battle that had been in Vietnam the day before, right where they had been in Vietnam, and there'd been this big battle and whatnot. And she says they'd been there with a picnic with Colonel Lansdale, and I kind of laughed, and I says, well, Mom, I says, do you know who Colonel Lansdale was? My mother is a very good CIA wife. I mean, she knows nothing. I mean, one time I'm sitting talking with her, and she says, well, your dad never went covert, and I says, well, Mother, what were we doing in Indonesia, when I was a little teeny kid, and she said, well, yeah. But, she says, well, he was a handsome, charming guy, I mean, this is as far as she knew, and so, I says, well, Mother, I says, we know from the historical record, okay, that in the Philippines, he would go out after World War II so that they could get rid of the guys who really beat the Japanese there, the guerrillas, and call them communists and whatnot, and put the oligarchy who had collaborated with the Japanese back in power, who were friends of MacArthur and this whole group, because the Philippines is all involved with this really quite a bit. And I says, in the historical record, we know that he would go out in the jungle and have fake battles, sometimes complete with ketchup and whatnot. And so, in this is 1956, okay, in Vietnam, okay, they're having a battle, okay, between Vietnamese, and why are they doing this, okay? Because they want to create sides, okay? Because, especially the people in the cities, okay? I mean, if they can because the people in the cities are more easy to herd, and whatnot. If they can get the people in the cities, on a side, okay, what side are you for, And then, well, gosh, you got to defend that side, and your talk and, all kinds of stuff. So you're much easier manipulated, so if they can get you on sides, okay, and whatnot. So, so my mother gets out the picture book because they take all these kinds of pictures, and she's going to show me the church in Chiang Mai, So I'm looking there's a church in Chiang Mai, and I look over the next, and here's Lansdale, in Vietnam the day before there, and whatnot. Looks like quite the battle, huh? And whatnot. And now, here's my mom, and and you can see over there on the side, it says Eudora. Well, it kind of cut off. I got to get a better one, but this is what I've got for right now. It says Eudora, that's my mother's name, Eudora out from Saigon with Colonel Lansdale and North Vietnamese military leaders. And so, this is the lengths that these guys go to. I mean, the lengths that these guys go to are amazing. I mean, the tragedy and the hurt that has been put on souls and people is tremendous. But look at their symbol. It's a symbol of death. These people, it's basically what we're talking about is a multi-generational cult, okay? And they use low-level form of sorcery. They're Negro or necromancers. They believe in the power of death gives them power, okay? And whether, all of their stooges believe that or not makes no difference, okay? But that's what we have at the core. I mean, John Forbes Carey and George Walker Bush are third cousins, besides members of the Order of Skull and Bones, okay? Okay? Now, and one other thing here, a little aside here, because you see, this thing happened at Tay Ninh, Vietnam. Well, what else happens in Tay Ninh, Vietnam? This is the temple of Cao Dao. I don't know if folks ever heard about Cao Dao, but Cao Dao is a interesting religion, cult, whatever. And listen, I have no argument, with mysticism, magic, brotherhood, or, fellowship or anything like that, I mean, magic and mysticism is a thing, just like a gun, it's what people do with it, I don't deny it and don't, say that it's all of the devil and stuff like that. I personally think people give the devil a lot more credit than he's due. But, cults are a way of unifying people in certain ways, and we're under tremendous psychological pressure here, propaganda and mind control here in this country, and whatnot. But Cao Daoism is an interesting religion, and the other thing happens up there is the poppy, and again, poppy isn't a bad thing, it is. Been used here by this group, and we're going to talk a little bit about one of the ways that it has been used. And here's some of the people that have done some of the using. And like I said, one of the things I've done a lot is a study of CIA drugs, and officially now, Oswald, killed Kennedy. The CIA doesn't do drugs, and George Bush was out of the loop. That is the official story. Okay, and it goes back to the Clipper ship and even before that, but this is a charmer here, and it was built in Newport, Massachusetts by George W. Jackman for Bush and Wilds of Boston. And, and the second consul in Hong Kong was also an F.T. Bush. And so the Bushes have been around a while. But what happened was, the Americans started smuggling opium as soon as America was America, basically in the late 1700s. It started by the Perkins family up in Boston. And then it was taken over later on by the Russell family of Connecticut. And one of the things that made it really possible, big time possible, was the Clipper ship. Because the Clipper ship had been developed by the Americans actually the colonists, because we were told as colonists that we had to buy our tea from one place. We had to buy it from the East India Company. It was the only place that we could buy tea from. Well, the Americans said, screw that, and we started smuggling tea like nobody's business. And we'd meet Dutch ships off of Caribbean and wherever we could, and we'd start smuggling tea and whatnot. And that was a big cause of the revolution and whatnot, not just because of the tax, but was because it was a monopoly, and we had to buy it from them. I mean, they even got it so we could buy it cheaper than they could in London, but we still wouldn't do it because of the monopoly thing. But the Clipper ship could, like I say, could tack against the wind, and when it got involved in the opium trade, it could make the trip to from Canton to India and back sometimes 3 times a year. Before that, it had taken up to 2 years for a ship to go from Canton to India and back. And so all of a sudden, all this money started just rolling in. And finally, opium got to be, they just doubled and tripled, the amount of opium going into China, and started running the opium clippers up and down the coast and getting other cities all hooked on it and different things like this. And it ended up actually causing the financial panic of 1837. Started out of opium because the opium speculators put the price up so high, and then it dropped way down, and it took all the specie out of the market, and so nobody had money and whatnot because it was all basically hard currency at that time. But here we have some of the convergence of the opium trust. Some people call it the Russell Opium Trust. You have William Huntington Russell, Alfonso Taft. Those are the two founders of Skull and Bones. And like I say, Skull and Bones been around a long time, 1832. Okay, and that was when it was officially founded. And it you know, they give you lots of reasons why it was founded, but basically the reason why it was founded was because there had been a secret society called Phi Beta Kappa, which was the first Greek letter fraternity in the United States, and it went open and honorary in 1831, and they needed to continue on with a secret society, and so that was Skull and Bones, because they try and say, well, they had a disagreement, but William Huntington Russell was still a member of Phi Beta Kappa, and so was Alfonso Taft, and so was a bunch of other members of Skull and Bones were also a member of Phi Beta Kappa, and Phi Beta Kappa actually ended up continuing later on to gather some of its secrecy back and continue to operate as part of this network, because this is a network. It's, you know, people have called it an octopus, many other things. But William Huntington Russell and Alfonso Taft were the founders. William Huntington Russell was the main founder just after he'd come back from Germany, just after William Hegel had died in chair in 1831 at the University of Berlin. William Huntington Russell's cousin was Samuel Russell, who was the owner of Russell and Company, which was the largest opium smuggler in the United States and the third largest in the world. William Howard Taft is the son of Alfonso Taft. He was the first guy to be, you know, both president and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and along the way he also was the first civil governor of the Philippines. And we'll talk about that in a little bit here. And then this is Robert Bennett Forbes, okay? That Forbes is the same Forbes that John Forbes Carey is a member of. Robert Bennett Forbes in his lifetime said, oh, he didn't have anything to do with opium, you know? I mean, he was just a businessman. He was just selling tea and cloth in China, you know? Well, you know, excuse me, Mr. Forbes, but he's been dead for, you know, a while, and after people get dead, researchers get access to some of their papers and whatnot, and people don't always know what to vet, and we know quite for sure that he smuggled a heck of a lot of opium, man, you know, and one thing they would do is they would use the Philippines to set up a company that had the same name as their other company, and so they say, well, yeah, we don't, but the one over in the Philippines would smuggle a lot of opium and stuff, and crazy stuff like that. Matter of fact, he had a ship that was called the Lyndon, and these guys, because opium wasn't legal, I mean illegal in the United States or Great Britain, it was where it was illegal was in China. It was Empress of China that didn't want it there, and so these guys had to come up with a way to smuggle. Okay, so what they did was they would load their ships up with opium, and then they would. They started this new thing. They called them store ships, and Robert Bennett Forbes called one. He named it the Lyndon. He sat there for, goodness gracious, about 10 years right off that island, and the ships would come up from India and offload all their opium, and then they'd go on into Canton with a bunch of pieces of paper, a bunch of chits, you know, and then they'd sell the chits to the people, and then the people would, you know, have their people come back to his store ship and pick up their opium and then, you know, send it on and whatnot. And they paid bribes, and, you know, everybody was happy and whatnot. This is Lin Tees and the Empress of China just couldn't understand that, you know, that Queen Victoria, she wrote a letter to Queen Victoria and says, how can you allow these guys to sell opium to my people and do all this stuff? You know, she couldn't believe that this would happen. And so she sent him down there to stop the traders from doing that, and ended up precipitating the first Opium War. And we had the first Opium War, and then they had after the first Opium War, they opened up the port of Shanghai and whatnot. Russell and Company soon had a office there in Shanghai, and then they started running a bunch of the boats and the trains. I mean, they went up to almost controlling about 80% of the transportation infrastructure in China. And then after the Second Opium War, opium became legal. And you had opium monopolies and whatnot, and so all the in the Far East and whatnot, you had all the little like Singapore and the Philippines, and they'd all have their opium monopoly, and they'd have a farm, and they'd grow the opium, and then have their dens and blah 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 blah. Well, you know, all of a sudden, these guys went from controlling about 80% of the infrastructure in the Orient, transportation, to about 5%. You know, they lost their cash cow. You know, and what had they done with all this money that they had made? I mean, these guys during this opium smuggling period, I mean, it's astronomical the amount of money that they made. And they brought that money here and used it to build the railroads and other things such as that, and take the land and corrupt politicians and whatnot. It's not, you know, Weyerhaeuser is a member of the Order of Skull and Bones too, you know, the largest landowner in America. And so they couldn't have that, you know, so they couldn't have legal opium, you know, because they lost their money. So what did they do? Well, they fomented war. You know, these guys are real good at fomented war, you know. And what'd they do? Well, they got the American population, oh boy, they got them all in an uproar about the Spaniards and how they were treating the poor Cubans. And the poor Cubans were just, I mean, they were putting the Cubans in the concentration camps, and it was just terrible what they were doing to those Cubans, you know. And they were doing yellow journalism and everything, you know. Hearst made the thing, you know, you supply the pictures, I'll supply the war, and all that stuff and whatnot. But they still couldn't get the people to bite. So we had a catastrophic event, okay, where the Maine blew up, you know, and they said, oh, the Spanish are mining their harbor, and they blew it up. Well, you know, Admiral Rickover did a big study later on, and he found out that it was the coal tender just kind of blew up, because coal tenders do that. And whether it was sabotage on our part, it might have been too, because if you look at the people who actually died, they put some low-level people in there to make sure they died. The main guy who was head of the ship, he wasn't on there that day, and other things like that. But you know, I wouldn't want to talk about conspiracy. But and then what they did, you know, I mean, here, you know, very typical. They you know, they got to have a bad guy, right? You know, because a lot of this stuff that these guys are playing is propaganda. You know, they want you to be, you know, if they can get you to think, you know, that you're the good, you're the honest people, you know, then and everybody else is bad, you know, they can control you even more, you know, and whatnot, because we're all just people, you know. And so, you know, they would, you know, use their propaganda. But then what was the first thing we did? Well, we didn't go to Spain. As soon as we declared war with Spain, we didn't go to Spain right away. No, I mean to Cuba. No, we took the Philippines. We took it's very interesting how that happened. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt, who was Under Secretary of Navy, he kept, the Secretary of Navy went home one day because he had the gout, and he went home early. Well, Teddy stepped up to the desk and sent off a bunch of orders and whatnot, and the Secretary of the Navy came back the next day and said, Teddy, what did you do? And he didn't rescind the orders, but he never left work early ever again. And Roosevelt's, if you look, they're also related to some of the same families. The Roosevelts were involved with Russell and Company, and were involved with the opium smuggling too. But one of the things he had sent off was to Dewey, and to tell Dewey, is we're going to be declaring war against Spain, and I want you to go take the Philippines. And that's exactly what happened. As soon as we declared war, he went and took the Philippines, and he met who did he meet at the beach? Well, he met a bunch of Filipinos who had been fighting the Spanish for some time then, and they had about decimated the Spanish. And they says, boy, we really kicked those Spanish guys, didn't we? But Dewey says, well, my little brown brother, we need to take care of you. And, you know, and so they brought in Arthur MacArthur, who was General Douglas MacArthur's father, and he was the first military governor there. And then they brought in William Howard Taft, okay, as the first civilian governor. First off, they declared the war over. Hey, we won, folks, hey, we won. Well, they hadn't really won at all, you know, and he fought a terrible, horrific war for 2+ years after that, where they went in and decimated villages and did horrendous things. And so William Howard Taft was out there, and McKinley was the president, and McKinley asked him twice. He says, William, would you like to be on the Supreme Court? And William turned him down. Now, if you read anything about William Howard Taft, he was a jurist. He looked good in black robes, you know, and he really wanted to be on the Supreme Court. He kind of wore it on his sleeve. It was kind of a, you know, joke at the time, but he turned him down. Well, after McKinley got shot and Roosevelt was president, Roosevelt asked him, well, you want to be Secretary of War? And he says, okay, I'll come back and I'll be Secretary of War. His daddy'd been Secretary of War. A lot of bonesmen been Secretary of War. You know, Stimson was Secretary of War for many years, Secretary of Defense and whatnot. And so he came back, and you look at the historical record, and it's very interesting. One of the things that Taft did was he declared opium illegal for the first time in modern Asia. Well, if you have an illegal substance like opium, and you have a population of Chinese who they don't really care about, you know, but I mean, those Chinese must have their opium so they can have a little smuggling, you know, smuggling to start up, you know, and stuff like that. And then what did William Howard Taft do? Well, as president, next, and as vice president, and then as president, he started the Shanghai Convention and the Hague Convention, which basically led to the situation that we have today, where we have 3 plants that are worth more than gold. Okay, and it has nothing to do with our health, has nothing to do with our children's health, has to do with these people keeping in place a black market. Okay, that is all that it has to do with. Okay, so that they can control us, so that they can create huge amounts of money. Okay, and you know, which gets us back to these guys, and you know, one thing I did was I put on a couple CIA drug symposiums, and one thing I did was I brought a bunch of desperate researchers. We'd all been looking into CIA drugs, and I brought us all together into one room, and we'd all read each other's stuff and whatnot and looked at each other, but we all brought us into each other's room, and the thing that really drove home really was three things. One was the size of the drug market. It's absolutely, I mean, 600 billion plus a year. It's absolutely huge. And the fact that they're not just addicting people, but they're also addicting our economy. They're addicting our bankers to that money. Okay, and then the thing that just really drove it home was, here were these people. We were all a bunch of different people who had been looking into it because it had affected our lives somehow, and so we'd wanted to look into it, and it was like we had a FAA inspector, an ex-LA cop, an ex-DEA guy, a lady who had worked in the first Bush administration, a bunch of authors, and a bunch of people. And the thing that really drove home was we were all talking about the same small group of people. Okay, because, you know, one thing is, you know, I am a hippie, okay? I know a little bit about drugs, okay? And also I know how they get here, okay? And, you know, when you look up the drug column, you get less and less people, you know? I mean, it's just how it works, okay? And whatnot. But this collage of basically the people that have been involved, you know, it's been very formal with the CIA, with bringing the drugs and the other agencies since the 40s, and then a lot of us researchers believe that George Bush has been in the CIA since he left Yale in '48, and one of his jobs was to coordinate the drug running and to bring it under a national security agency, the Aegis, because these drugs are brought in. I mean, we have so much testimony from, you know, grunts, privates, and corporals and stuff who basically get told, okay, this is what you do. You know, you follow these drugs along. You go put these radio beacons in the jungle so the planes can fly or whatnot. But it is something that is done with a sanctioned, because one thing that the secret society has done, it has created our national security state and used that national security state against us, the sovereigns here, because this is a republic where the citizens are the sovereigns. Now, well, you can't really read this, but you know, you don't have to take my word for it. I mean, one thing, there's a great book out there. It's called Opium Empire and the Global Political Economy. And it's written by Professor Carl A. Trocchi out of Australia. And basically he says, drug trades destabilize existing societies not merely because they destroy individual human beings, but also, and perhaps more importantly, they undercut the existing political economy of any state. They have created new forms of capital, and they have redistributed wealth in radically new ways. You know, opium created pools of capital and fed the institutions that accumulated it. The banking and financial systems, the insurance systems, and the transportation and information infrastructures. They're all beholding to it. They're all beholding to it, and they keep them beholding to it by keeping it illegal. I mean, we have statements from Jardine Matheson, who was the largest opium smuggler. They would say, you know, if this ever becomes legal, you know, it'll be the death of them, you know, and whatnot. Which, you know, like I say, it's a symbol of death. This is what happened. This is a cell of the Order of Skull and Bones. Okay, you get 15 young men every year at Yale University, and if we look at their rituals, their rooms, and what people have said, you could say that it's the regent's degree of the Illuminati, but it's a way of meeting the devil. You know, I mean, you have a secret society, and you can any secret society. I don't care, you know, where you are in the world. Let's look at it from a sociological standpoint. When you have a secret society, they are like an onion or like a pyramid, where you have a lot of people on the base, a lot of people on the outside, and then you have an administrative cadre, and then you have an inner core. And in the inner core, they are all related. And it's the same thing with Skull and Bones. They're all related. So you're going to have some of these people that, you know, will get involved heavily with Skull and Bones. Other of them will just not have anything to do with them and go off. And one way that we analyze Skull and Bones, because Skull and Bones doesn't talk, is we look at their members and we look at their jobs that they have had. And it's quite an interesting group. Now, some of the effects that they've had upon American society, okay, been very, very profound, very profound. This is Supreme Court, and this gentleman here in the middle is a member of Skull and Bones. He's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Morrison R. Waite, and it is, he was a person with 2 sentences with no debate, gave corporations the right of personhood in the Santa Clara versus Southern Pacific in 1888. And so they've, you know, had a very profound effect. Another gentleman here, actually of the same cell as Skull and Bones, 1837, Dr. Benjamin Silliman. It was a guy from Skull and Bones that invented gasoline. Okay, he took oil, raw oil, okay, and made the first 2 petrochemicals. One was paraffin, the other was gasoline. Okay, he issued a report and he said, "Gentlemen, it appears to me that your company may have in their possession a raw material from which, by a simple and not expensive process, they may manufacture very valuable products." Okay, now, this was in the 1850s, and this was a Pennsylvania Rock Oil Company of New York. This had been started by a Mr. Bissell, and he had gone to a Mr. Townsend for financing, and they had sent samples of oil around to Dartmouth and a couple other colleges, and one of them to Yale, and this guy invented this process. Well, as soon as he issued this report, the Pennsylvania Rock Oil Company of New York passed into the hands of investors from New Haven, Connecticut, where Skull and Bones is based. Okay, and pretty soon you see in the membership list of Skull and Bones the Bissell family and the Townsend family. Okay, and this also goes back to the drugs and to the marijuana. You know, I mean, because marijuana was just becoming on the scene, very much of a competitor to petrochemicals and other things you can make. Some of the early plastics were made out of hemp oil and biomass oils, and then the paper and other things. And if they can keep it illegal, it keeps a very, very useful plant out of competition for them, because that's one thing that these guys tend to do. If they can sequester competition and put competition so it's not a competition anymore, they do. It's the one thing they did in 1917 when they were working on setting up communism. Russia became the largest oil producer in the world in 1917. They kind of took it off the market for a while, you see. The oil, also, here's Mr. Rudolf Diesel. Now, he wasn't a member of Skull and Bones, okay? He was this guy, he was born in Bavaria and whatnot, and we can't read all this here, but, you know, he filed for a patent, basically, for an internal combustion engine. They call it the diesel engine and whatnot. And one reason he did this was because of social things. He did this because he thought that this was something that the everyday people could use and could get out of control of the big industrialists and all of this stuff. And you see, in 1990 exposition, he ran his diesel on peanut oil. Not peanut oil and petrochemicals and whatnot, but when he first made it, it was running on vegetable oils. And he basically says, diesel engine can be fed with vegetable oils and will help considerably in the development of agricultures in the countries that could use it. You know, I mean, see, we all think that we're addicted to oil. It's a game that they've all created. Okay? Because they you know, this sham and this game that they've been playing isn't just been going on for a couple of years. It's been going on for generations. Okay? Where they create these sides, and it's very useful. You know, it's very useful to have true believers on one side and true believers on another side, you know, and you get them throwing stuff back and forth, and you got a show going on, and nobody's looking up and seeing what's going on. Okay? But you know, because I mean, do you feel guilty when you're out there driving a car and polluting? You know, you've been trained to feel that way, okay? Because it's a means of control. Because you know, people are good, you know, and how easier to control somebody by manipulating their good intentions, you know? Because we don't have to be addicted to oil at all. We could be running all these cars and automobiles and stuff on peanut oil, on hemp oil, on mustard seeds. You know, it is a game that they've got us playing, and so they want us to keep playing because they win every time. The house wins. Just some more stuff about you know, the advantages of diesel and whatnot. I mean, it's just, you know, it cleans the air when you use the biomass. It cleans the air. It's just ridiculous. And now what Skull and Bones is about groups of people. Okay, and about controlling people. Now this is the Glee Club, 1917 at Yale, and the little Svengali guy there in the middle is Prescott Bush, or George H.W.'s daddy. And you know, a lot of times we're meant to think that, oh, Prescott wasn't anything. You know, I mean, George was the first big powerhouse. Well, I don't, you know. Look at the body language in there, you know. I mean, that's Prescott in the middle. This is Roland. These are all members of Skull and Bones, all members of Brown Brothers Harriman, an investment bank, you know. And you know, this is Roland Harriman, Prescott Bush, Knight Woolley, and Robert A. Lovett, who was Secretary of Defense again, and a bunch of other things. Now, Prescott Bush, 1951. At that time, the leading candidate for Republican Party was Robert Taft of Skull and Bones family. But they'd been doing polling, and they knew that he just wouldn't win. He just wouldn't win. But they knew that Eisenhower would win. Didn't matter if he was a Democrat or Republican, who he was for. And so 1951, Prescott Bush was at Brown Brothers Harriman, and he went to Germany to go talk to Ike. And it's in his an oral history that Prescott Bush that wasn't supposed to be released, but it got released anyway. So, but he went to Germany and talked to Ike, and says, "Well, you know, Ike, there's some guys, and we kind of, well, we'd like you to run for president. Are you a Republican or a Democrat?" He wanted to know what he was, and Ike says, "Well, he was a Republican." He said, "Well, good. We'd like you to run for president and whatnot." And Ike says, "Well, you'd think about it." The very next week, guess who shows up? But they were all working for Harry Truman at the time. Was Dean Acheson, he's not a member of Skull and Bones, but he's a member of Scroll and Key. There's 7 secret societies, senior secret societies at Yale, not just Skull and Bones, and Robert Lovett and Averill Harriman. Averill Harriman at that time was head of the Mutual Security Administration director. And you see, one thing that these guys did once they got Eisenhower in as president was that, see, Ike had been a general in war, and Ike had ordered boys on the beach. In other words, Ike had ordered boys to die. It didn't really weigh heavy on him. You know, I mean, Ike was, you know, able to do some things when he was president, but one thing he did too was these guys says, well, you know, instead of putting boys on the beach, you know, we can put a couple spooks in there, you know, and we can get things done with a couple spooks instead of putting boys on the beach. And so, and Ike says, well, yeah, and I don't want to know anything about it. And they said, oh, great. So they created this big wall of deniability around the president and created this big, what he called the military-industrial complex, and this intelligence operation, this national security state. And it was Robert Lovett he was the head of the Robert Lovett Committee in 1956, which basically set up the CIA. Okay, and like I say, and this guy Harriman, you know, was. Of the Mutual Security Administration, and was, you know, he was all kinds of different things in the government at different times. Now, here's a letter, and this is a letter from it's Dresser Industries, which is now owned by Halliburton, which is, you know, used to be run by Mr. Cheney, and Cheney isn't a member of Skull and Bones, but he went to Yale. He decided he had a girlfriend back in Wyoming, and he went home, but 9 family members, Cheney family members, are members of Skull and Bones, the same family. And this is a letter in 1953, okay, from Neil Mallon, who is a member of Skull and Bones, and Neil Mallon Bush, okay, pretty close to the Bush family there. He was a member with Prescott Bush, was a member of the 322 Regiment in Fort Sill, that stole Geronimo's bones. And this is a letter to Allen Dulles, you know, talking to him about, you know, I'm going to have Prescott Bush there. They're having a meeting in Tiny. They're talking about Tiny. I don't know if that was Tiny Rowland, who was a Nazi financier. Could have been. He was running around the same group. And Prescott Bush, and they're going to talk to him about their pilot project in the Caribbean and whatnot. Well, what are they talking about there? Well, remember this guy here, George Bush? Well, you know, he went down to Texas, you know, and started Overby Petroleum, Zapata Petroleum. Well, what's Zapata Petroleum's big claim to fame? They're the first people to do offshore drill rigs out in the middle of the Gulf, out in the middle of the Caribbean, okay? And we have so many statements and affidavits from grunts who says, oh, yeah, we were on these platforms, and some of them named Zapata, and we were using these platforms as staging areas to run drugs and guns, you know? And because you have helicopters, you know, off of these offshore drilling wells going back and forth, you know. I mean, if you really want to get tricky too, you got big pipes, you know, going back and forth, and you can do all kinds of things, you know. I mean, it's just amazing, because you see, these guys pulled off something pretty, you know. Remember my dad, you know, talking about the Vietnam War is about drugs, okay? Well, now think about this, okay? we have a war over there. We take over the Golden Triangle. Okay, we have a cheap supply of heroin. Well, what do we need? What do we need? Well, we need somebody with money to buy the heroin, right? Well, let me see. We have a war, okay? We get some guys over here. It's a disgusting war. They don't like it. Okay, they're only going to be here a year. They're going to go back home. Hey, think I can get some of those soldiers hooked on heroin and send them back home, and then they'll be hooked on heroin, and I've got a ready market, and they'll spread it around? I don't know, you know. I mean, look what happened. You think they could do something like that? Yes. Okay. Well, it's about time. Let me just finish up here, and we can finish up. It gets back to this guy is a guy by the name of Barry Seal. And there's a book here about Barry Seal burying the boys. Okay, Barry Seal's the largest drug smuggler ever in America. Okay, used to bring it in C-130s, you know, big planes, you know, a lot of room back there. Okay, used to fly over places, drop it out of his plane, you know, in parachutes and stuff like that. Okay, he was a CIA agent, okay, and a DIA agent and other things. He's sitting with his lawyer one time. His lawyer says, Barry, what's going on? You know, how come you don't just go straight to jail? What's going on here? What's going on? And Barry says, you want to know what's going on? He says, call this number. Tell him you're me. Okay? So he calls that number, his lawyer does, and tells him you're me, and the guy who answers his phone says, Office of the Vice President. This is when George H.W. Bush was vice president under Bush, okay? And he's running two big working groups, one on drugs and the other on terrorism, okay? And gets handed off to some admiral, okay? So, you know, have no illusions, you know. That's what's happening. Okay. And there they are with his drug smuggling boats and his buddies, whatnot. We can pause now and take a break and come back and talk a little more. Hello again. Thank you very, very much again. Okay. Some people asked some questions. I think I'm going to answer a bunch of them there. They want to know, you know, well, what's going to happen. Now, somebody asked, do I really believe this, you know, and whatnot. I mean, you know, I mean, it's not so much a question of belief or whatnot. I mean, I know what happened to me, and I just, you know, present historical record what I have found. And one thing I tried to do in the book was present a lot of different information. And you know, people make up their own mind, but I will admit that, you know, anybody that looks at the literature and looks at it, it finds it very hard to deny. And the thing that I found looking at this stuff for, goodness gracious, well over 30 years now, is the more that I look into it, the more I find confirmation, and the more you know, things that you find. Okay. No, let's back this way. Well, now, you know, we've got George W. on the scene, who's a member of Skull and Bones. He was a member in 1968. That was the last year that Yale was male only. I mean, Yale University is a big place. I don't know, anybody here been to Yale? People here been to Yale? It's an amazing place. It's got huge, big buildings, you know, and women have changed it quite a bit. But there's Georgie W. Skull and Bones, The Thing of Death. September 11th, 9/11. Okay. Like I said, these guys believe in the power of death, you know, and I run a couple lists on the internet. One's called CTRL, Conspiracy Theory Research List. The other one's CIA Drugs List. On the CIA Drugs list, we had a lot of researchers into the CIA drugs, and you know, right after 9/11, one thing we did, because we'd been looking at conspiracy and stuff for a long time, was we started deconstructing 9/11 just right away, because we said, this doesn't add up, you know, what are we supposed to believe here? You know, it like goes back to the drugs things. You see, we're supposed to believe, like in the late 1800s, that scientists were so stupid that they didn't know heroin was addictive, you know? I mean, heroin has its name from this I.G. Farben, the same people that invented the name aspirin and heroin, you know, and it was given to young kids as cough syrup, and then later on those young kids grew up and they wanted, you know, narcotics. But 9/11, you know, just look at the power that these guys got from the killing of 3,000 Americans. I mean, it's amazing, you know. And it supposedly happened out of incompetence. And out of incompetence, they tell us, oh, well, but, they gave the CIA more money, all these people more money. They got more power. They have more power over us. And 9/11, you had plane number 11. These guys work in ritual. These guys are, like I say, they're low-level sorcerers, okay? Plane number 11 flew into the Twin Towers, number 11, okay? On September 11th, there's 111 days left in the year. Okay, exactly 11 years before 9/11, 2001, George W. Bush, while president, spoke before a joint session of Congress and talked about how we could bring a new world order out of the chaos in the Middle East, and talking about Iraq directly, Plane number 77 flew into the Pentagon. The Pentagon is on longitude number 77. And then if you look at numerology, okay, what is the number 11? Number 11 is a master number, okay? And if, they're projecting that they're the masters, okay, then what does that make all of us? It makes us slaves, right? See, what they're trying to do is move us into a fascist state without even telling us, okay? So our children are just going to wake up and it'll be there, okay? And, when was John F. Kennedy killed? On 11/22, on Bloody Elm Street, right across from the First Masonic Temple in Dallas, right next to the Trinity River, right below the 33rd degree parallel. These people were powerful. They didn't have to kill him there, but it was done there. It was done in a ritual aspect. It was called Killing of the King. You can read about it in Fraser's Golden Bough, written in the 30s, When you kill the king, you take over his power. Okay, we went as a country. We went from the land of Camelot, which these folks very much set up. Okay, this mime in our thoughts, in our cultural. We went from the land of Camelot into the land of Oz. Okay, where the wizard is behind the curtain manipulating things. Okay, this is a process of revealment. Okay, where they are revealing themselves to you without even telling you. Okay, because that way they have quote unquote power, they think. Okay, 9/11 was very similar to another fire that happened, the Reichstag fire. Okay, that's what brought Hitler to power. I mean, these people they read history and they use history over and over and over again, basically the same way. Now, I was going to do something today, or some things, but I didn't quite get to it. Yes, everybody, and say a nice prayer for my young son. He had a burst appendix, and he had surgery, and everything came out okay, but I wasn't able to get all my slides done, so I just used some of these slides. And this is basically to talk about magic and why these people are what they are. And like I said, I'm not opposed to magic, and just show that magic is out there. And I don't know if everybody can see this one down here at the bottom. The dead shall be raised. You've got the symbol there. The winged snakes, and that's over a big Egyptian gate that's at the end of High Street there in Yale University. And we'll get to talking about it more. Rose. Well, this. You've heard the sign of, rose being secrecy, and it basically came to us out of a thing where the Greeks and the Romans were taking over some of the Egyptian cults, and there was one of the Egyptian boys that was going like this, and they thought, well, it meant secret, and so they said that this had given this rose to this guy, and it became the meaning of secrecy. And that was Horus. And, not to get too much into Egyptian mythology, but you have basically Isis or Osiris and Horus, and they're brothers and sisters, and they kill each other and all kinds of different things. But they're basically the archetypal myths that a lot of our religions are based on, and they're very much related to people's psyche. And he created the legend goes that he created the winged serpents after this battle, and they were supposed to put everywhere that he was. And Luther and Gutenberg. One thing that's going on right now is we have a lot of people looking at this information, and one thing that's going on is very similar to like what happened with Luther, in that with Gutenberg, with Gutenberg's press, it brought us people like Luther. It also brought us our country here, and the internet is something that's very similar to Gutenberg's press, and one thing that it is doing today, because like Gutenberg's press got rid of the oligarchy that was there then, the Roman Catholic Church, and brought us about the rise of the Puritans. New Haven started at St. Stephen's in London. It was started by a Calvinist preacher by the name of John Davenport. And he was there. He was a Church of England preacher. Then he got chased out of town, went over to Holland, and started writing to John Cotton, who had moved to the Massachusetts colony. And at this time, these preachers felt that the end of the world was coming, that they were going to smote England, and they best get over to the New World, to New Haven, and set up this new country where they could be saved with Christ. Then we're talking here two saints, St. Stephen's and then St. John's, and St. John's is a patron saint of Masonry. And he also has to do with skull and bones, and we'll get back into that now. Calvinism. Calvinists, well, Henry VIII wanted to get free from England, or get free from the Roman Catholic Church. He wanted to marry another lady, and he declared the Church of England. Well, and he declared that was the true church. Well, pretty soon there were people that were getting arrested because they said this isn't the true church, and they wanted to start their own religion. Well, these people were called the Puritans. They didn't call them the Puritans themselves. They called themselves the saints. And a lot of these people, they followed Calvinism. Well, Calvinism, they believed that all humans were inherently wicked and offend God, that there is an elect that God chose to be saved regardless of their actions and how deserving, that Jesus died for those special elect, not just for everyone, and then once God has chosen elect, they are saved by irresistible grace no matter what, and that these elect or saints cannot fall from grace once saved. Okay, and the people that settled New Haven were hyper-Calvinists. Okay, and hyper-Calvinists believed these basic beliefs of Calvinism, then also believed in the doctrine of reprobation. And this was a belief that God purposely foreordains damnation. In other words, there are those who are predestined to hell. And so you have, some elect that are doing God's work, through their deeds, kind of hell's angels. And then you have the Illuminati. People were asking about the Illuminati. Okay, well, the Illuminati was a secret society. It was started by this gentleman up there, Adam Weishaupt, started officially May 1st, 1776, and infiltrated the Masonic, a lot of Masonic organizations. A lot of historians say that it was brought to here by Phi Beta Kappa. Phi Beta Kappa was started at the College of William and Mary December 5th, 1776. It was the first Greek letter society. When you're a member of the Illuminati, you took a Greek name, like Adam Weishaupt was known as Spartacus and whatnot. And the Illuminati was disbanded by the Bavarian government in the 1790s. Well, Weishaupt didn't die. He moved on to Saxe-Gotha, where he was under the tutelage of the Duke there, and stayed alive until the 1830s. And right after his death, 5 princes went out from Saxe-Gotha and took over the main royalty of Europe. Prince Albert came from there, and one from Greece, and some of the other places, and was infected with this secret society and the cult and their belief of he called it cosmopolitanism, which is basically a one world order, a government with them in control. New Haven was built on 9 squares. Okay, and 9 is a you look into magic, and nine's a magical number. The Order of Skull and Bones is on High Street, which is about right here. And High Street was one of the original alleys, actually, through there. It became one of the first streets. You can't drive anymore. Yale University has taken over all of that. But right here at this end, right at the very end of High Street, stands this huge, big Egyptian gate. And this was built in the 1840s. And it stands right here. And then this area right here is a cemetery. And it's full of bones and full of obelisks and some interesting crypts. And then just following High Street right up here a little later on, Remington Arms was up there, just for a reference point for later on. Now, High Street, I call it Shakedown Street. To get onto High Street, you go underneath this bridge. And this bridge connects the two art schools, and there's a lot of history about these art schools and different things and how they relate to Skull and Bones, and I talk about it in the book, but it's interesting. You go underneath this tunnel. Skull and Bones is on the side there. This is the Skull and Bones building. It's been remodeled a couple times. But you go down here, and like you see, here's the gate down there. Right across from the gate over here on this side is Yale Law School. As you can see, it just looks like a huge, big cathedral. It's basically a big block, huge block. The Clintons, both Clintons went there. And then right across the street over here on this side is Book and Snake. Okay, it's another one of the secret societies there. And as you can see, it's a three-story white mausoleum, no windows, big black door, completely surrounded by a fence, and that fence is twisted snakes, caduceus on them there, and whatnot. And then right across you have this gate that says the dead shall be raised. And then you go on inside inside this gate, and right on the inside, right about there, is this sarcophagus, and it says Ashman on it. And I guess because of that, they changed the street in the front of there to the name of Ashman Street. And Ashman, he didn't go to Yale, really wasn't a New Haven person. He was the first guy in Liberia, our first American consul guy in Liberia, and Liberia was set up to send free blacks, and they didn't do it because they were nice. It was because they didn't want a bunch of free black people here because they thought they would be trouble. So these people in New England were raising money to send the blacks back to Africa, so the free blacks, because they were scared of them. And he was the head of it, and he caused a bunch of problems, like, they set up free elections. Well, his guy didn't win, so he said, well, those elections weren't free, and kept jimmying the elections till his guy got elected, and that caused all these factional problems that Liberia is still dealing with today even. So he came back to Boston with the fever and died in Boston in like a day as soon as he came back, and then a day later he was buried in New Haven. And we think maybe it was because of a Whitney thing, but he was buried there in New Haven. And then because of that, they changed the front of the street to Ashman. Well, what is Ashman? Happens to be the Egyptian name, the modern name of the city of Hermopolis, the city of Thoth. Okay, where basically magic started. Where magic started, and it's called where the sun first shone on the earth and all this type of stuff. And then another interesting thing I found in the graveyard, they have all these skulls with wings on them. And some of the skulls are happy skulls, and some of them are mean skulls, and some of them aren't skulls, or people with on it there. But it's interesting there. And then right in the very middle of this fraternity, what you find is the crypt of St. John. Now, and it again uses the winged serpent now, and is surrounded by a fence that uses the winged serpent, these little pillars that are very similar to the pillars that go all the way around this 16 acres of bones. It's right in the middle of New Haven. That's very valuable property. And it's the only tomb in the whole place that uses the same symbology It's flanked on both sides by these white sepulchers, and then you can see in the background there's all kinds of obelisks and all kinds of stuff around. And one thing that it seems that it could have been used for is a ritual birth. The Phi Beta Kappa was known for having ritual birth ceremonies where you would go down to the dark and you would be blindfolded and given substances or different things and told different things and being shown esoteric symbols and whatnot, so that you think that, you know, you're working for the good guys and different things. And then there are, on one side of the graveyard is a power plant, and there are steam tunnels that go all through Yale. And the police there think that there's a steam tunnel that goes into the tomb, and these steam tunnels could be used for a ritual type thing. And the interesting thing is that Skull and Bones was able to take over Yale University through people that are buried in this tomb. Book and Snake, Sheffield University, Sheffield Scientific School, part of Yale up until 1956 was called Sheffield Scientific School. And it was through the Sheffields, it was incorporated by the same gentleman who incorporated Skull and Bones, Daniel Coit Gilman. And if you follow the machinations of Skull and Bones, they were first able to take over Sheffield Scientific School, and then they were able to take over Yale for many years. I was a member of Skull and Bones who was the treasurer of Yale. They had the treasury of Yale like from 1862 to 1977. A member of Skull and Bones was the treasurer of Yale except for 36 years. And of those 36 years, the 32 years, the guy, he had like 9 family members were in Skull and Bones. So it points to very much of a Western magical tradition with these secret societies. And one thing that has happened in the Western magical tradition a lot has been a lot of duality. Okay, a lot of good and bad and different things. Myself, I'm strongly a monotheist for whatever that goes, and I think it's a much stronger thing. I think duality leads to craziness, and you take the Western magical tradition, and you mix that with the Calvinist, and you get a philosophy that is thinking that, okay, because like I said, these groups, this center group, they're all related. And who are they related to? Well, they're all related to, like, the Queen of England. They're all related to royalty. They all think they're blue bloods. Okay, well, why do the blue bloods think they're blue? Okay, well, because they think they're related to King David. Okay, so they have this feeling that they are bringing about history. They are bringing about the apocalypse with themselves playing the leading roles. And they think it is their due to be in charge of us because they are the natural leaders, is what they feel. And there again is the tomb. Okay. But when you look at their actions, you know, it's not like they created this secret society for the betterment of us people, and the betterment of our government. Okay, it seems that, I mean, what do they do is they hire within themselves, they appoint their own, is what they do. And they lie to us, you know, and getting back to the Illuminati scare and proofs of a conspiracy in George Washington, when he was given proofs of a conspiracy, he was told, he came back and he says, yes, he knew the Illuminati was here. And why they're here is because they didn't like our form of government. Because we are a republic, you know, my rights come from God, okay? A republic is based upon human freedom and liberty. The Constitution is a piece of paper that is supposed to limit the powers of government. My rights do not come from a vote of the people. My rights do not come from a piece of paper. My rights come from God, okay? And they do not want us to realize that. They do not want us to act upon that. They want to change our form of government. They want a more of a state, a Hegelian form of government, a more of a fascist government. And, you know, he lies. Both John Forbes, Kerry, and Bush, they say, you know, it's so secret that they can't talk about it. Well, we'll see if this thing works here. Oh, it didn't work. Well, come on. Oh, come back here. Well, it's supposed to be video, but I can't seem to make it play. Well, it won't. But like I say, there's Kerry. His same answer is, you know, not much because it's a secret. Is there a secret code? I wish there was some secret I could manifest. 22 is a secret number, you know, or all kinds of secrets, you know. And he's just saying it's a better, but, you know, where is their allegiance? You know, is there allegiance to this secret society, or is there allegiance to a republic? You know, what I found out in looking at John Kerry is John Kerry kept George W. Bush out of the loop in the Iran-Contra. You had two members of Skull and Bones, David Boren, who's a good friend of George Tenet, who takes credit for getting George Tenet, head of the director of the CIA, and John Kerry were on the Intelligence Committee. John Kerry ran the intelligence and narcotics part of it. We learned a little bit, but not very much. A bunch of the stuff is still classified, and it was kind of like a modified limited hangout. Like I say, officially, still George Bush was out of the loop. Okay? So, I mean, if these guys were for real, they would talk about Skull and Bones. He would say Skull and Bones is, you know, they would, instead of trying, and it kind of makes it a moot point if both people are a member. And then again, it's kind of the revealment process, kind of putting it in your face. You know, these, I mean, they're third cousins. This is George Bush. You know, he's talking about it. It's my heritage. It's a part of who I am. Do you have any qualms about joining an elite secret club like Bones? No qualms at all. I was honored. I was fairly nonchalant. I didn't view it as a great heritage thing. I didn't take it at all seriously. But we also know from people who were there that he spent more time at the tomb than anybody else. And, you know, the tomb is what we call it. What they call it is the temple, you know. And, I mean, you know, George Bush tells every good voting Christian that he's a Christian, you know. We have, you know, documentation. There was a lady, when you get married in Skull and Bones, all the members of your cell come to your wedding. I've got a wedding picture in there. It shows a bunch of the members at the wedding. And then your bride gets initiated into Skull and Bones. Alexander Robin talks about in her book, one of the sister of a bride hid in one of the haylofts and saw the ceremony. They were all dressed up in black robes and using swords and talking in a strange language. I mean, I don't know. It doesn't sound like any Christian ceremony I ever heard for, you know, for what it's worth. Oh, that's a video. That's not going to show. This is Book and Snake. And this is the founders of Book and Snake. As you can see, they're sitting around a Skull and Bones, just like Skull and Bones, you know, and you know, in magical circles, you know, I mean, there's something to be said about one is Skull and Bones, S and B. The other is B and S, you know. I mean, there's, you know, and you have Woodard. Bob Woodard was a member of Skull and Bones. You know, a lot of us think that, you know, Watergate was an organic act. It really wasn't. Woodard came out of naval intelligence and whatnot. It was just kind of these guys are real good at using scandals to cover up scandals and to move history along into the way that they want to, and to make us think, oh, well, yeah, we've got investigative reporters, yeah, you know, and whatnot. Okay. Here we're going to talk about, you know, I've looked into all this, and you know, I talked on Nori and Art Bell, and one of the comments that I heard the most people back was it disturbed a lot of people, you know, hearing about this. And I can understand that. I mean, I had the good fortune, my dad told me some stuff that I didn't believe many, many years ago. It just got to sit there in the back of my head, and I got to just, go on with my life and think about it and do other things, and then got to look at it after a while. And I came across this book. One of these guys is one of the members of the Capitol Steps. I don't know, they might be coming, they're going to be in Eugene, I know, pretty soon. And this is a very, very interesting book. I came across it from advertising, from Advertising Week, I think it was in there. And, because these guys have spent a lot of money on mass psychology and propaganda and stuff. They made a conscious decision in the early 1900s that they were going to use mass psychology and propaganda on us to control us. They weren't going to tell us the truth, and they were going to move history along. Okay? And one thing that these guys found out was that, and it's very, there's a thing in the Hindi that's very, very similar about the yugas and the 4 cycles. And they found that there's 4 generations that happen through history. And just has to do with the cohorts and the different people raising each other and whatnot, that there's these basic cycles that happen through history. And after you have a certain amount of these 4 cycles, a big change is going to happen. And that change is going to happen. This book came out late 1980s, early 1990s. They predicted the change was going to start about 2003, 2004. Just by looking at these cycles. Basically what they said was, the hippies are going to get old and didactical and just say, stop this stuff and whatnot. And they said, and some of it's going to have to do with about the drugs. And I think they were absolutely right. And it's one thing that I've seen happen, because in my position, just looking into CIA drugs for so long, I've just become friends with a whole bunch of people who used to work for major daily newspapers. One gentleman, James Norman, he was for Forbes magazine. He was a senior editor of Forbes magazine for 5 years. For 10 years before that, he was at Business Week, basically a business beat reporter. And Daniel Hopsicker, he was basically a business beat reporter. They are some of the last people, because business news is generally a little bit more truthful than what we get. And they weren't used to having some editor telling, oh, we won't talk about that. You can write the story and we won't run it, So they kept looking at it. And they would stumble across these stories. And James Norman, his story had to do with the drug smuggling and the drug laundering, and it had to do with a company called Altel and all these companies and whatnot. He ended up losing his job at Forbes magazine. It went through the fact checkers, went through the attorneys, went through everybody there, was all set, ready to go. Finally got pulled at the last minute by Casper Weinberger. He ended up putting it out on the internet. He ended up losing his job, and finally, after about 3-4 years, he was finally able to get a job at Platts Oilgram. And so these people have, the journalists have realized, that they can't talk about this stuff, because like I say, officially, Oswald killed Kennedy. We just had Peter Jennings, for an hour. Tell us that, I mean, no matter physics, no matter all kinds of stuff, they keep on telling us that, And what these people say is, like I say, 2003, 2004, and I really do see it happening. Like I was talking about the printing press before, the internet. The internet, the only thing comparable in history is the printing press. And the printing press got rid of the Catholic Church and brought us our republic by the books that were written, by common sense, by the talking back and forth of people, and that understanding brought us our republic. Granted, it wasn't perfect and whatnot, but it was better than what had been going on, and was a new start. And what the internet has done, you see, the culture far exceeds their conspiratorial control many, many times. okay? And when the internet first came out, remember they says, oh, well, here, you want to send like eight little packages, little small messages back and forth. Well, the people said, no, we want more. Well, the market just drove it. The market just drove it into what it is today, which is something beyond their control. So they, and into something that they had really never envisioned. And it created something that has allowed, it's like after the Kennedy assassination, Hoover and Dulles were talking, and they said, there's a lot of stuff in the 26 volumes. If you read the 26 volumes of the Warren Report, there's a lot of stuff in there. But they says, we don't care. American public doesn't read. There'll be some professors and some kooks that read it, but what do we care? Well, now the professors and the kooks, okay, can talk to each other, and the whole world looks on, okay? And you have, you go out on the internet, how many sites do you find that some guy or some girl just put up that says, gee, George Bush is a great guy, and isn't Iraq swell, and isn't what we're doing great? You don't find that. But you find thousands of sites of people on their own blood, their own sweat, their own tears, setting their own thing up there. And what this is doing, okay, we are creating, okay, and just by sitting down and creating, because, we've gone from a culture, one thing the internet has done too, we've gone from a culture that if you wrote more than 3 letters a year to somebody, you were strange. Okay, if you wrote a couple letters during the Christmas season, you were lucky. Okay, but we've gone down to a culture that is, composing, and this creativity and this, yearning for understanding is counterbalancing their evil actions. Okay, because one thing that these guys were looking to do in January 1, 2000, okay? They had the ceremony all set up. They had the music written, the light show and everything, and they were going to have the golden pyramid, the top of the pyramid, put on the pyramid in Egypt. They were going to do this. They didn't do it. Why didn't they do it? Because us dumb people weren't sufficiently under their control. And whatnot. And they have, been trying to bring this about. They have their backup programs, Jesus in the sky with aliens, who knows, all kinds of different psychological games they've been setting us up for, to play along with them. Okay? But it basically gets down to hoodwink what he's going to tell the Christians, I'm a Christian. He's, whatever they can tell anybody to hoodwink them to get their way, they're going to do. Okay, and whatnot. And truly, what I see is going to happen, because with all of their power, okay, with all their power, persuasion, in the middle of a war, we're in war right now. We're supposed to be hyper-nationalist and everything right now. Okay, in the middle of a war, the most that they can do is they can get 2,500 people saying "yoo-haw, woo-haw" in a southern military town, okay? Where a couple 100,000 people marched spontaneously in New York City and around, okay? People know something's going on, okay? And they aren't buying what they're selling, okay? But there really isn't any other place for them to go to buy anything else, because, what these people are doing hasn't been done lightly, okay? They changed their education system to do it, okay? They brought, television. Television was invented in the 20s, okay? How come it didn't become a commercial liability until after World War II, okay? Well, it's because, they were working on a plan, okay? They had to work some bugs out. They had to try this stuff on people to see what would happen. Nazi Germany, okay? They tried a lot of this out there to see, how it would work, how they could get, how they could kill a bunch of people and the other people would go along with it, how things would happen, There they did it mostly through the radio, okay, and big ritual, and stuff, okay? Here they were doing it through the television, okay? And mind control, okay? Television is a technological means of mind control. Okay, it runs at 60 cycles per second. And there is a flicker that happens there. It's kind of imperceptible, but not really, you know. And you read any book about hypnosis, I'm sure you have some here, and it'll tell you that 60 cycles puts you into a trance so that you believe what you're seeing. Okay, now when they started to make color TV in the 50s, they started to say, hey, you know, there were some people that jumped up and said, hey, you know, we can get rid of that flicker for you. You know, we can make TV much better. They said, sit down, sit down, sit down. You know, and so, you know, so that we could, you know, continue to have that, you know, and move us into this, you know. Obviously, I mean, they are stressing violence and sex and, you know, and all this stuff to move us along. And I mean, it's like abortion and homosexuality. The elite don't give a rat's ass, excuse my language, about abortion or homosexuality. Okay? It's, you know, it's something that happens. Okay? I don't care who you are, what you believe, you know, homosexuality and abortion are going to happen. Okay? Every day, somewhere. Okay? And as long as they happen, they can put their hat on a pole on it and get a true believer over here and get a true believer over here, and they got a show going on, and a bunch of people are distracted and all kinds of stuff. Okay, you know, I mean, it's just like, you know, the war and the whole, you know, the Marriage Act and all this stuff. I mean, you know, it's like people, nobody can really think. I mean, you know, how could George Bush get elected again? You know, I mean, he's got a war going on, the economy's going south and all kinds of stuff, you know, but he doesn't really have to get elected again. All he has to do is make you believe that he was after the election is over. You know, Arnold Schwarzenegger didn't get elected the governor of California, but most of us think he was. But it was spiked, and you don't have to spike it very much. And they know it was spiked because they went to, you know, researchers went to counties that used computer only, and the splinter candidates, you know, they got a whole bunch of votes in those counties. In the counties where they're all done by paper, those splinter people got very few votes, you know. And that does them all kinds of good things because, you know, all of a sudden you're in California, Arnie's your governor, okay, you're walking down the street, you didn't vote for him. Well, maybe that person did. Oh, I don't like you. Oh, maybe that person. Oh, I don't like you. You know, and you got people choosing disparate sides and all kinds of stuff. I mean, now, can you believe it? They're floating the idea that Arnie could be president.
Yeah, they are.
You know.
Yeah, they are.
You know. I mean, isn't that just amazing? You know. But you know, I don't know. I truly think that you know, we're going to end up in the streets, and their corruption is just so much that it's just going to show. Anthony Sutton, my good friend, he said, you know, these guys aren't going to leave out of an election, you know, and but nothing this outrageous can last forever. And the elections for many years have just been this whole Hegelian dialectic anyway. You know, I mean, Jimmy Carter went to a Bilderberger meeting in '74. You know, all of a sudden this governor from down south became our president. No, nobody heard about him before, but he became our president. You know, 1991, Bill Clinton went to a Bilderberger meeting, and he was our president in 1992. You know, they knew that the American public wouldn't stand for just having a Republican up there all the time, you know. So they got to put somebody in there that, then, you know, after Carter, you know, everybody, you know, he was the wussy who lost our guys in Iran and everything, and he couldn't do anything right, you know, and stuff like that. So you said Democrat after Carter, and, you know, yes, you know, and it's just, you know, psychological game, moving history, you know, into the position where, you know, they can take control and whatnot. I mean, most people don't even know we live in a republic. They think we live in a democracy. You know, and let me see, if I live in a democracy, that means that if 51% of the people vote and say I can't do it, I guess, well, I can't do it, you know. But that's not what, you know, history led all the way to our republic, to what we built up, you know. And so that's about all I got to say right now, as far as what I'm talking about, and I'll take some questions, and thank you all very, very much for coming, and do support this group here. And I do have, books for sales, and do support. There's, I'm just a voice of a lot of other people behind me, like, Daniel Hopsicker and Mike Rupert. I don't know, he might be in front. It doesn't make any difference, but all these other people, and support these people, and don't let, like in, Eugene, you've got, a lot of people there that stop. Like, we've tried to bring Rupert to town, and they won't let people bring him to town. They stop debate. People on the left stop debate. You have David Korn. These people created both the left and the right. And the foundations. The Skull and Bones people started the foundations. And there's a guy by the name of Chip Burley. He gets $75,000 a year from the foundations to run a 3-man office, to basically tell people on the left that don't listen to conspiracy theories, and that if you listen to a conspiracy theory, you're being taken in by the right wing. And, if there's an article on the internet called Belmont Brotherhood. It tells about how John Birch Society was set up by the intelligence services, basically to put that meme out there into the population, that conspiracy theories are nothing but, right-wing kooks thinking about, spacious bodily fluids. They put that meme out there into the population and whatnot. And, so that we're supposed to, if somebody says a conspiracy, we're supposed, oh, that's terrible. But, look at the conspiracy. We're supposed to believe that Osama bin Laden, did 9/11, through Muhammad Atta, which, Daniel Hopsicker, he's been down in Venice, Florida. He's got 4 hours of interviews with Muhammad Atta's girlfriend, who was this stripper who did cocaine with Muhammad Atta, this Muslim fundamentalist who supposedly blew himself up. He was running with the same people who were doing CIA drugs. And I mean, one reason why they haven't told you the official story on 9/11, because the official story is so full of holes, it's not funny. One thing that Dan Hopsicker finds is he finds that one big job the FBI does is they go to people's doors and they say, you haven't been talking yet. You haven't told anybody what you know. And basically what the FBI does is they run around and cover things up. And this some of this stuff goes even deeper. And basically what we're dealing with, again, is a multi-generational cult, of psychopaths, of elite deviants, who are in control of our country. But there aren't that very many of them. And one way you can look at it is George Bush, when he was governor of Texas, he killed a lot of people. There was only one guy he didn't kill. That was Henry Lee Lucas. Henry Lee Lucas was a killer for the cult. He tells stories about knocking off hands and different things, and just nothing this outrageous can last forever. And I just know that we'll be in the streets in pots and pans, and they'll be gone, and we're going to be sitting and talking back and forth between people. And what I end up think is going to happen is we will see the end of time. And what will happen is we will change from solar calendar, which is some of the basis of the basic mind control that we're under, which is the 60 cycles and all of this, and we're going to change from that to the lunar cycle in 2012, which is much better for the ladies and other things. And I think that this can happen by discussion by people, because, the internet isn't just the United States and America. The internet is the world, And we do know that, there's not very many of these blue balls, spinning around, mud balls spinning around the earth that have this carbon life and whatnot. And the creativity and the respect, is going to beat these guys and whatnot. So that's what I have to say.
RVML Resource Center is a volunteer-operated federal 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit organization. RVML is dedicated to providing easy access to a comprehensive collection of information on a variety of metaphysical, spiritual, and personal development subjects. RVML accepts and appreciates all donations. Material and monetary contributions are fully tax-deductible. This recording is not copyrighted and permission is granted to broadcast, exhibit, or duplicate all or part of this program for non-commercial educational purposes. This live presentation was organized and presented by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. For more information, please visit rvml.org.